Welcome to the Word Unwrapped podcast with
Dr. Gregg Curtis. In this podcast, we take a deeper dive into some of your favorite Bible verses that may require some added context to further explain their intended meaning.
And now here's your host, Dr. Gregg Curtis.
Thank you for joining our podcast today, The Word Unwrapped. Today we're dealing with another important subject. It is a prophetic subject that we're going to be looking at. I have one of our staff people here helping us today, Jesse Armstrong. And we're going to be looking at Psalm 83 and maybe some other passages just to ask ourselves the question, the events we see happening in the world today, are they prophetic? Are they fulfillment of prophecy? Is there anything that we can point to that says this might be the fulfillment of what we see going on in our world today? So it's an exciting time, and we're looking forward to all the things that God is doing, but what do you think God's doing in the world today?
Well, I think we look on the news. I think we even look around us and we see earthquakes and disasters. We see wars and destruction. And so we want to know, are these things what the Bible is talking about? Could they be unfolding in front of our eyes? Is that what we're looking at?
Well, you know, Jesus told us in Matthew 24 that we can expect certain things to intensify the closer we get to His coming. And He said that there will be wars and rumors of wars. There will be many disturbances in the skies, and there will be earthquakes and famines and droughts, and there will be hurricanes, and there will be all of these things. But what He said was, it's what we call the exponential curve, that the closer we get to the Lord's return, the more of these we're going to see. They're going to come with intensity and frequency more than they have in the past. So we've lived with these things for thousands of years. So why is that a sign for today? I think it's a sign because Jesus said you're going to see it intensify and you're going to see the frequency more often. He referred to a woman who is in contractions about to give birth. He says her contractions get more intense and they get quicker as closer to the delivery. So I think the closer we get to the Lord's return, the more of this we're going to see. And one of those passages that we're seeing that people ask about is the 83rd Psalm. There's a lot of questions about, could this be what's happening in the world today, especially in Gaza and with Lebanon and the Hezbollah and all of the things that are happening with Hamas. Israel is front page news today. The terrorists are certainly making life miserable for the children of Israel. What do you think? Do you think Psalm 83 has some significance today? Maybe we ought to read that and just let our listeners know where we're coming from.
Sure. Psalm 83, it says, O God, do not keep silence. Do not hold your peace or be still, O God. For behold, your enemies make an uproar. Those who hate you have raised their heads. They lay crafty plans against your people. They consult together against your treasured ones. They say, Come, let us wipe them out as a nation. Let the name of Israel be remembered no more. For they conspire with one accord. Against you they make a covenant. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagrites, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, Philistia, and the inhabitants of Tyre. Asher also has joined them. They are the strong arm of the children of Lot.
Okay, so we see here that in Psalm 83, a group of nations immediately surrounding Israel have said, Come, let us plot together, let's form an alliance to eliminate Israel so that they are no longer a nation. So we're talking genocide. We hear a lot about genocide today, and Israel's being accused of genocide, but here in this verse that we've just read, it is the nations that surround Israel that are actually preaching genocide, wanting to remove Israel from the face of the earth. And then when you look at the names of these nations, you find Gaza, which today we know that this is a Hamas stronghold. We find Lebanon, which we know today is a Hezbollah stronghold. We see, you read Asher, but it's the ancient name for Assyria or the Syrians. We know that's a stronghold of terrorism today coming against Israel. So when we look at Psalm 83, we see that tiny little nation of Israel, about the size of New Jersey, is completely surrounded by these very nations and tribes and Arab countries that has surrounded Israel, and they are attacking in some form or the other. So, could it be that we're seeing prophecy being fulfilled before our very eyes today? Is this what the psalmist said, talking about our day?
Yeah, I think you make a good point, and it's a good illustration of those birth pains, and that intensifies until one day, at the moment that you don't necessarily know, the time has come, right? And that's what that's what Scripture tells us. And I think we as Americans have to be careful, because we want to look at what's going on here and directly around us and compare it to Scripture. And not that those things aren't part of it, not that, God doesn't have the whole world in mind. But to me, when you start talking about Israel, when you start talking about His people, when you start seeing those things being fulfilled, those are the things that we should pay attention to.
Absolutely, because Israel is God's prophetic timepiece. We keep an eye on Israel because when Israel became a nation, the first time any ancient nation ever dissolved, went away, and then many, many years later come back again and form a nation. First time we saw that, when Israel became a nation back in May of 1948, that started the prophetic time clock of God. We measure everything based on how God is dealing with Israel in a prophetic sense. So we know that when Israel became a nation, Israel has had to fight from day one for their very survival. They're still fighting for their very survival. And God has made a promise. When you look at Amos said that God said, you will never cease to be a nation again. Once you come back together as a nation, you will always be a nation. So we know that Israel's here to stay, even though they would like to see Israel wiped off the map. That's not going to happen. God's made that very abundantly clear. It doesn't mean Israel won't go through a lot of tough times. Mm-hmm. So I think that we do have to look at Israel in a prophetic sense, because God's dealing with the nations of the world through Israel. As a matter of fact, the prophet said that Israel would be a stumbling block to all nations. And when you read that, we see that. As a matter of fact, I think it was interesting just a few weeks ago when Netanyahu was the prime minister of Israel, when he went to the United Nations to give an address. When he stepped up to the podium, about 2/3 of the nation's representatives in that body got up and walked out. He was speaking basically almost to an empty room. That is fulfillment of prophecy as well.
Let me read that verse there. I had that marked for this, and I think it's very interesting. It's Zechariah 12:3.
Right.
On that day I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all peoples. All who lift it will surely hurt themselves, and all the nations of the earth will gather against it.
Yes.
That should be gathering our attention right there.
Absolutely. And then the other day we find where the president of Turkey has called for what he calls an Axis alliance between Turkey, Russia, Iran, Syria, I think the Sudan. When you look at who he's asking to come together as an alliance against Israel, and then you read the prophet Ezekiel in the 38th, 39th chapter, he talks about a major war that's going to take place. And you look at the players who are coming against Israel, they are the very players that the president of Turkey is asking to come together in this Axis alliance. So I think when we look at Psalm 83 and we see the players there and the fight that's going on today, when we hear the president of Turkey asking for this alliance, and he calls certain players out, and you read what the prophet said in Ezekiel 38 and 39, you are seeing God setting up this end-time event like a major chessboard, putting things in place. And a lot of our people think the world is just falling apart. But like I said this past Sunday, it's not falling apart. Everything is falling in place.
Right.
And this is all according to God's design. And we need to understand that this is not just randomness. This is not just a world gone amok. That this is, in every sense of the word, a design that God had planned a long time ago, and we are seeing the fulfillment of this design. And how close are we? If the Lord said, when you see these things happen, what did he say? He said, look up, for your redemption draws nigh. Now, he said we wouldn't know the day or the hour, but can we know the season? And I think the answer to that, for me, is yes. And I think, personally, we are in that season. Now, before we leave, one other question I want to ask you. Do you see the birth of Israel, the budding of the fig tree? Do you see that the generation that saw this happening, when Jesus says the generation that sees all of this will not pass away until these things are fulfilled? Do you think he's talking about our generation?
That's the question, right? You bring up a good point, though, that I think that we can look at really closely is God is not going to let his people, Israel, be destroyed.
Right.
And I would say probably the very minute that it looks like that's going to happen is the minute that what you're saying we need to be looking up.
Yeah. I had one guy tell me, he says, you know, the moment when it all comes down, the sudden destruction comes down, that's the moment we all go up. He may be right about that. We do know the Bible teaches about a rapture. We do know the Bible teaches about a second coming. And Jesus said, I will come again. So we understand that's a fact, that's his right. coming. We don't know when, but he says, when you see these things happening, look up. It's even at the door.
And the point of it is so that we're ready.
Right.
And to give us hope.
Right.
That's what we need to keep in mind, I think, and a lot of people have fear about it. And I think what you just said is a great way for us to phrase it and to look at it, is that it's not falling apart, it's falling into place. That is hope, right. And that is redemption for us.
And that is the whole point. Paul told Titus, he said, this is our blessed hope. So today, we're proclaiming a blessed hope. Jesus is coming.
Thank you for being a part of the Word Unwrapped podcast with Dr. Gregg Curtis. In this podcast, we take a deeper dive into some of your favorite Bible verses that may require some added context to further explain their intended meaning. If you have a question or would like to suggest a topic idea for discussion, email us at thewordunwrapped@gmail.com, and we may use your question in a future episode. If you enjoyed today's program, please click the subscribe button, and we'll notify you when new episodes become available. And remember to click the share button if you'd like to send this podcast to family and friends.